It was July 1st, 1999. Something so unexpected and unpredictable happened. It was the new boom of the internet and an era that would change the workforce forever. The euro had just been introduced. But somewhere in Japan, a quiet revolution was about to take place, changing the lives of thousands of housewives. This revolution changed the landscape forever, boosting Japan's struggling economy once again, and giving housewives a chance to manage their households in a non-struggling way. Forex trading was hot back in the day, and it was glorified in so many ways. By using the power of trading, a group of housewives dabbled into the world of finance that Wall Street giants and banking leaders ruled. This group of Japanese girls is known as Mrs. Watanabe. But who exactly are they? Is there a leader of the Watanabe group? And how much money did this group make? Let's uncover the truth behind how these Japanese housewives started ruling the world of finance. It all started in the late 1980s. Japan's economy was booming. It was so strong that it was the largest in the world only after the United States, which is much more prominent in size. This is true especially in the real estate and finance industry. The prices were at an all-time high, people were making a lot of profit, and everyone seemed to be hustling their way into the financial sector. But then it all went down. There was an economic crash, and Japan's economy was destroyed in just a few years. In the 1990s, Japan's economy crashed. Both real estate and stock market industries collapsed, wiping out millions of yen from the country. It happened almost overnight, which made everyone confused to the next level. This decade is also known as the lost decade of Japan. However, the Japanese banking companies didn't stop there. They wanted to recover what they had lost, and the interest rates would drop to save the country. While this did help, it couldn't save the country from the damage of the crash. However, during this challenging time, something strange happened that shocked the world. It was in Tokyo, a modernized city known for its women in the workplace. The rise of these women wasn't so in offices, but in their households, just beside their kitchen. This group of women was known as Mrs. Watanabe. To answer your question about whether or not there's a single entity behind Mrs. Watanabe, the answer is no. The term Watanabe isn't someone's name, but indicates a group of people. A group of women outsmarted the financial industry, making millions of dollars to care for their households. Instead, the term Watanabe is a term like average Joe. You'll be surprised to know that the word Watanabe is Japan's fifth most common surname, which is a good indicator of its popularity. In this case, the term was used for all Japanese housewives or average housewives because women in Japan's households control their household finances. So, after the 1990s crisis, the household women had enough, and they started looking beyond Japan into foreign lands. Their search led them into forex trading, where they could trade different currencies for profit and take the profit home. Over 1 million of these women began dabbling in the financial market, leading to the emergence of Mrs. Watanabes from all over Japan. But something so extraordinary happened that it shook the entire world. Let's think from an average Japanese woman's perspective. Imagine you're a housewife in charge of the finances. You have some money saved, but there's no investment option. The interest rates are low, and leaving your money in a savings account also yields few results. So that's where the brilliant idea came from. Instead of lending money in Japan where it's cheap, these women decided to lend money in countries and areas with high interest rates. This is precisely the carry trade, a concept that was the basis of Mrs. Watanabe's success. So, back in the 90s, these women borrowed money with a low interest rate, in their case the yen, and then used that money to invest it in a higher interest currency like the Australian dollar or the euro. And the difference of interest is what you take home, also known as the profit. And that's precisely what Mrs. Watanabes from all over Japan did. The interest rate is the profit these women received, which was the basis of carry trade. And this was just the beginning of Mrs. Watanabe's carry trade phenomenon that would change the lives of millions of Japanese women from all over Japan. But as we know, what goes up must come down. While the good times seemed like they would never end, it was far from the truth. Carry trade quickly spread throughout Japan, and millions of housewives started selling their yens at low interest rates to high interest rate currencies. This created a balanced Japan, at least for a couple of years. According to the Financial Times, more than half of Japanese household assets are cash and bank deposits, which seems unusually high compared to the US and European countries, which are under 40%. We all know there's no such thing as zero-risk investment, and Mrs. Watanabe's had no idea what big obstacles would hit them. It was the Russian ruble crisis that shook the world. In 1998, a global storm hit the financial market, where Russia defaulted on its debt, creating a massive worry for countries worldwide. But how exactly was it wrong for yen? At that time, the yen was very stable, and other countries started pulling their risky investments and investing in the yen, which seemed relatively constant. This made the value of yen rise, and the interest rates go high as well. The whole concept of carry trade got messed up, and it was less profitable than it once was. If the value of yen goes up, the currency that Mrs. Watanabe has put her money into repaying the borrowed yen would go into loss. And to their dismay, that is precisely what happened. When the Russian financial crisis hit, investors got scared and pulled their money out of the most risky investment and put it into a safe place, in our case, the Japanese yen. At this point, the gap between interest rates shrank, and it was a learning opportunity for all Japanese housewives that even the best strategies could go to waste. The fall was natural, but that nearly wasn't the end of the Mrs. Watanabe group. In the aftermath of the Russian financial crisis, all the Mrs. Watanabes were left in awe, wondering what's the best move to do next. Their investment got to losses. It was history repeating again with no way out. The government was dealing with its own economic crisis and challenges. Interestingly enough, in April 1999, Japan introduced itself as the first country to be a zero-interest rate country. But even after all these efforts, Japan faced deflation. This was a monster for Japan, as deflation indicates the overall economic price decrease. This makes people not want to spend their money and delay their purchases. This was because an average Japanese customer expected the price to fall further, making the whole economy unbalanced. To fight this issue, the Bank of Japan decided to take another step to fight deflation. And in an attempt, it became the first ever country to introduce a policy called quantitative easing, or QE for short. The practice is relatively widespread and has been adopted by other countries worldwide. This was a key especially in 2008's financial crisis, where the stock market crashed. Even in the recent pandemic in 2020, this policy was adopted. QE, or quantitative easing, is when a central bank, like the Bank of Japan, creates new money and uses it to buy government bonds. This comes at specific interest rates that are fixed during the bond creation. This floods the economy of a country, and in our case, a country like Japan, with money. It also further lowers the interest rates and encourages people to borrow and spend in the country. We can think of it as adding fuel to a fire to make the fire brighter and more aggressive. That was the only solution the banking system saw back in the day. However, what about Mrs. Watanabe? For them, this was a double-edged sword. Even though lower interest rates meant the probability of getting higher interest rates in other countries was possible. However, the risks associated with the carry trade were still in their minds. Knowing that you've lost an enormous sum of money, anyone would be skeptical to invest in the same thing twice. While the QE was a perfect system for Japan to manage its economy, for Mrs. Watanabe's, it was still a fresh trauma. However, another twist changed all of Watanabe's financial journey. As we hit the 2000s, Japan was still working hard to fix the previous decade's financial crisis. But even with so much risk, the carry trade remains a popular option for all investors to take profit from. The gain was hard to ignore, especially when the yen got cheaper for retailers and investors. It was 2005 when many Japanese housewives started trading in the online currency, and the term Mrs. Watanabe was revived. But this time, the name was famous worldwide, and it was imagined as a lady in her 30s who is a tech-savvy lady sitting at her computer to make a good amount of profit. Many of these women started with forex trading because it was easy for beginners to invest and take profit from. The media started taking exclusive coverage of this new trend, and many articles about the Real Housewives of Japan became popular online. It was basically housewives who were balancing not only their household chores, children, and relationships. Still, they also worked hard to invest their hard-earned money and make financial assets and profits. But that isn't to say that they didn't encounter any discrimination, because men of that time were calling them kimono-clad Mrs. Watanabe. Still, these ladies were strong enough to keep making profits and beating a male-dominant industry in many ways. At this point, hedge funds and banks understood the process of this trade, trading from a low-interest country and investing in countries with high interest rates. The strategy still remains popular to this date. As time passed, many other people started getting into this trading to the point where it got global attention. However, even then, many financial institutions and media explained the risks that Mrs. Watanabes were discussing. They said that if another financial crisis occurred, history would repeat. It would be just like what happened during the Russian ruble crisis. The whole concept of carry trade would be decimated and Japan would have to start all over again. So, to counter that, Japan moved away from the idea of QE and zero interest rates. This move aimed to make the yen rise and make the carry trade less attractive to your average Joe. Even after many massive changes, Mrs. Watanabes of Japan enjoyed their dealings. Their story inspired millions all over the globe, and it was so wholesome seeing the life savings making more and more profits instead of getting devalued in the bank. However, another substantial financial storm occurred that almost no one was expecting. "2008 was a horrendous year for the global economy. It was a more significant challenge than Mrs. Watanabe's ever faced. This crisis started after the collapse of the Lehman Brothers, a massive banking giant. And as this giant crumbled, investment banking was crushed, and the global financial market started going down the drain. It sank the United States economy and many other countries. Like the Russian crisis, many economies went into a deep recession, but this was more aggressive and dangerous. Once again, the worldwide investors got shaken and started finding a safe space to invest until things were better globally. And what happened? Once again, they pulled all their money and assets out of risky investments and put them in one safe space. Everyone knows Japan. They repurchased the Japanese yen, and the demand rose almost instantly. For Mrs. Watanabe's, it was history repeating, or more of a déjà vu experience. The rising yen meant that paying back their borrowed yen would cost more too, making the profit insignificant in many cases. All the Mrs. Watanabes from all over Japan were panicking, and this financial crisis was more aggressive than the previous one. They rushed to escape their position with other retail investors involved in carry trades. All the profits were turned into losses, and these people, who were enjoying these profits and eating off of their investments, started experiencing loss and panicking. This could have been better for the amateur traders introduced to the scene. They suffered significant losses. It was so bad that one of the women lost nearly $100,000 during this crisis, and her entire family's savings got decimated due to the crisis. Once again, this crisis was a huge wake-up call for the investors that carry trade is one of the most vulnerable forms of investment if a situation like this occurs. It was a sad moment for all Mrs. Watanabes and fellow traders looking to live their lives off of their assets paying back. However, after this financial crisis, the world realized how truly interconnected the world is. Governments also realized how quickly a crisis from one country can impact the whole world. But after all the scenarios we've seen, there's one thing that Mrs. Watanabe's is known for: resilience. They weren't simply deterred by this new financial crisis, but wanted to keep their activities going. Many even kept their activities a secret because of the embarrassment. So, instead of giving up this time, all the Watanabes from Japan started learning more about trading and ways to make a good profit that was less reliant on the financial system. This time, they didn't just give up and move away from trading, but started educating themselves and ultimately discovered day trading. Day trading was one of these new avenues that was getting popular then. Carry trades were more long-term, while day trading allowed them to earn profits quickly and efficiently. Encompassing trillions of dollars in Japan, Mrs. Watanabes had the power to change and bend the market according to their will. So, they started focusing on the nation's household savings to move markets and gain profits in the short term. Day trading was utterly the opposite of carry trades, where they had to wait for profits to roll in. Many women who gained success in this area started emerging at that time. For example, Fumi Wakabayashi, the inventor of I Like Stocks and the creator of a Nintendo DS investment game, profited from trading at home. Other women like Yukiko Ikebe managed to earn a whopping $4 million from trading commodities and currencies over a few years, started rising in the news. That's where the Watanabes saw a significant shift. Instead of giving up their dreams and getting stuck in a complicated Japanese economic system, they made something of their own. Day trading became a more significant trend not only in Japan, but in the world as well. But how are Mrs. Watanabes and retail investors controlling the world of day trading? Well, that's a great question. Firstly, you need good internet and a computer to become a day trader. So Japan was known for its advanced technology, which the consumers leveraged. Secondly, with so much rise in trading and influential trading figures like we've discussed above, many resources were available to learn. From courses and free resources to webinars, almost anyone could learn trading, especially in Japan. Well, even after all these good aspects, Japan was still on the brink of getting defaulted. The GDP ratio was a mess and the wages kept decreasing. That's why it is still considered one of the most expensive countries in the world. To improve things, Japan needed extreme solutions that would fix the problem from its core. In 2012, the Japanese Prime Minister launched a new Abenomics plan with two main strategies. First, we have monetary stimulus. The second one was fiscal stimulus. After these strategies, the Japanese economy rose and the stock market grew as much as 30%. However, the effects were short-term, and everyone blamed Mrs. Watanabes for knowing something unknown to the market. The market seemed unfairly set up for them, and everyone pointed out that they were quickly cashing out the profits. It happened in May 2013 when the stock market started crashing and struggled to recover. And yes, as we all know, all Mrs. Watanabes had cash at home, which is common in Japanese households. So, in this deflationary era, they were just holding cash instead of buying assets. The whole financial system was in the hands of Mrs. Watanabe, and everyone was looking at how she managed her money. Moving forward to today, Mrs. Watanabes have been through many roles: budget manager, carry trader, retail trader, and day trader. There's not an area of trading that is yet to be discovered. But in the end, we can take unlimited inspiration and motivation that as long as you have an internet connection, some savings, and willingness to learn, you can support your family and live a happy life. If you liked the video, please subscribe to our channel and ring the bell icon for future videos like these. Until next time, peace.